Hello! Today we are wrapping up the month of October reading-wise, and well, let's see if we can fix this before we get fully into the video. And yeah, it was a super productive reading month, guys. Like, I read so much and I didn't get burnt out, so that was good. I did 2 different readathon challenge things, and I filmed my last vlogs of the year because, believe it or not, it is November. And that means we are about to be in year-end wrap-up mode. I have a lot of videos that I always do this time of year that are coming up, and I'm excited about it. And it's my favorite time of year on BookTube, so I cannot wait to get through those. I really only, because I start and end my reading year, I end my reading year on November 30th, and I start my reading year on December 1st in terms of my list. I only have 1 more month of reading. So I'm glad that I was able to get so much into October, though now that I'm thinking about it, not that many are gonna make the lists, but there were ones that I thought might make the list, so I'm glad that I've read those to know if they will or not. And yeah, anyway, all in all, very productive. And I specifically decided I was not going to read any arcs this month. I started on one and then was like, I'm just not going to make this a priority. So that was also nice to just kind of get through some backlists as opposed to frontlists, because I pretty much have read all of my advanced reader copies for the year. I got one late in the game one that I need to read this month, but other than that, I'm ahead. Anyway, feel like I'm rambling. October was a very productive reading month and a pretty high quality one. Let's wrap up October. We're gonna start with my stats, and then we will do my disappointments, my surprises, and my hits. I think some of you are gonna be mad about some of the disappointments. Okay, so in terms of stats, I read 27 books in October. That did include some like novellas or shorter things, so you know, take that with a grain of salt. But I read 27 books, 21 of which I owned, 6 of which I did not. I read a total of 7,828 pages for an average book length of 290 pages. On average, I read books that were 6 years old, and they had on average been on my TBR for 8 months. I paid for 66.67% of the books that I read, and the average cost to me was $9.33. Genre-wise, one of my most well-blended months. I had pretty equal representation from most of the genres that I read regularly. I would say the only thing that isn't in here is contemporary romance, but that makes sense. I've been slowing my roll a little on contemporary romance, which possibly we'll talk about in my best romance of 2022 video. But anyway, that's really the only thing missing from this mix. And I guess technically I have a 3-way tie between horror, mystery, and sci-fi romance as my top read genres. And then, like I said, a very high quality reading month for me. I read a lot of books that I gave 4 stars to, which is always exciting. To me, a 4 star is like an A-, so it was exciting that I had so many that I felt like were that high quality. Some 3.5, also had some below, but the bell curve kind of is peaking at 4 stars, and I had 1 4.5 star, and I had an average rating of 3.38. So yeah, so those are the stats for the month. And then in terms of challenges I need to call out, really the only thing to mention is the Hacienda. Now I will tell you that I talked about this in my mid-month check-in. I have since had our book club on this. I will link that. That was the Blades and Bodice Ripper book club. In that discussion, I gave it originally like 3.5 to 4. And it was because it gave me what I wanted it to give me. It was a lot of vibes, which is what I want from this kind of book. And it was just fun, ooky spooky fun. I didn't think it was great, but I thought it was good. Then I bumped it down to a 3.5 by the time I'd first talked to you guys about it, because I was like, I'm not really remembering much about this, so it shouldn't be a 4. And then through that discussion, I ended up giving this a 3 because as we talked about it more, we collectively, I think, came up with a lot of ideas that would have made the book a lot better. So that makes me feel like it's not, you know, it's not exceeding my expectations, which to me is what a 3.5 is. Like, it met my expectations, it gave me what I wanted it to give me. That feels like a 3 star. So just amending my rating there. I probably need to go do that on Goodreads. But yeah, anyway. Buddy Read is the only challenge book I need to call out. So that means we can dive straight into my disappointments, which I suspect will be the spiciest part of this video. So Okay, where to start? Maybe let's just rip the Band-Aid off because this is the one that I think people are going to be upset about. So I DNF'd Thunderhead by Neil Shusterman. And I've already gotten at least 2 messages from people being like, honestly, how dare you? The reason I DNF'd this is honestly not really to do with the book. It's more to do with how I ended up reading this. And I'm kicking past Mara because I said at the time, okay, I've got both of the sequels and I'm going to try to read them quickly after Scythe. And then I just didn't do that. So I let about 1.5 years elapse between when I finished Scythe and when I started this. And by the time I got to this, I got about 100 pages. No, a little further than that, I guess. Yeah, I want to say I got 160-ish pages in. So I gave this a good try, but I just was not invested in the story that was being told. It's a different kind of book than Scythe is. Scythe is really about our 2 main characters who are in a competition with each other, trying to compete to be a part of this elite cadre of, serial murderers, basically, it's a sci-fi dystopia kind of thing where because there's no longer death, there has to be some kind of population control, and it is the Scythe who decide who dies permanently to keep the population levels under control. So that was a super cool setup, and that whole book is basically about like some of the political machinations and the 2 main characters competing to see who is going to join this elite group. So I really enjoyed that story, and that's just not what this is. There's a big thing that happens at the end of that book. This is some of the fallout from that. We also have a new point of view character who is, I don't believe, in the Scythe, if I'm remembering rightly. And I just didn't connect with this. And I was like, I think for me to be invested in this book, I'm going to have to go back and reread Scythe. I don't want to do that. I DNF this and I'm soft DNFing the series, not because it's bad, but because of the way I chose to read it. I'm just no longer invested enough in the story. I'm not going to unhaul this book and The Toll, which I have. I'm going to hold on to them for probably 1 year or 2 to see if I have some sort of new inspiration of like, no, you know what? I'm going to do a binge. I'm going to grab Scythe. I'm going to read all 3 of these back to back to back. That is possible. I don't think that's going to happen, but I'm not going to unhaul this in The Toll yet because I don't know for sure that I'm not going to be inspired to try to finish. As things stand right now, though, I just don't care enough about the story that this was trying to tell. I will also tell you I did like jump forward because I remembered everyone was like, it's the ending. The ending of that book is so crazy. And like, yeah, I mean, it was a good ending. I could see how if you were really invested in this, it would be a very exciting cliffhanger, but it's not enough for me to be enticed to read it. I'm sorry. The next highest rated disappointment I had was These Toxic Things, which I should have DNF'd and didn't. This was just not good for me. I gave this 2 stars. I talked about it more in my Black Aweenathon vlog if you want to check that out. My problem with this is just that it's too much. It's too much plot. It's too many side characters or not interesting characters that are introduced into the story. All the side plots are very distracting, and the writing isn't bad, but it just doesn't click with me. And I think I said at the end of that kind of review I gave in the vlog, like, I am putting Rachel Housel Hall into the same category that I put Lucy Foley in, I think, which is whenever her books come out, the premises always sound really interesting to me, and I'm very the kinds of stories they're trying to tell are very appealing to me, but the execution just doesn't work for me. So sadly, I think I just need to like let it go because it's just not, it's not good for me. It doesn't work for me. This makes me want to do, I know Books and Lala, Kayla, she does a Third Time's a Charm series. This makes me want to do a Third Time's a Charm with Rachel Housel Hall, Lucy Foley, and like maybe Catherine and Valenti, because I think all of those I've read 2 books from and didn't like, and I really like the idea of their books. Their books are always appealing to me when they're marketed, but I just never end up liking the books. So yeah, I don't think that this is like the worst thing that could ever happen. Like, I don't think you probably won't have a bad time reading this. I didn't have the worst time, which is why I kept going instead of DNFing it, which I want to do for this kind of thriller. It's not like this was hard to get through. I just don't think it was very good. So yeah. Oh, I should mention the setup for this is basically this woman is a digital archaeologist, which is basically sort of, she does individual archival preservation for people. So like, instead of doing that for like a museum or something, she does it for individuals. It's kind of like a souped up scrapbook, but it's a little bit better. Like, it's a little bit more of a thing than that. And she goes to do one for this woman, and it just like kicks off a series of like things that have happened that are murderous and bad. Anyway, Bummer. I don't know that this was like a super hyped up book, but I was looking forward to it, so I'm sad that I didn't like it more than I did. Sorry, I'm filming this on my lunch break, but something blew up, so I had to respond. I don't totally remember what I was saying. Hopefully I was done talking about these toxic things, and we'll move on to the Pallbearers Club. Guys, this was a bummer. So I pre-ordered this kind of late in the game, but the reason I did was because I'd seen some feedback from people that this had like multimedia in the sense of inner linings from a second character, which is something that I'm always into. And basically the way the book is pitched, let's say, is that there is a dude who in high school is in this thing called the Pallbearers Club, which it turns out forms basically for like college application purposes, like to have something unusual as an extracurricular. And in the course of being a pallbearer for these different funerals, ends up thinking somebody's a vampire and like trying to figure that out. So it sounds like it's in the realm of horror, or like in the realm of supernatural whatever. And this just is not. Like basically this is lit fic, I would say, general fiction. And it's a pretty good version of that. I don't necessarily have a problem with the book. I think do I have a problem with the book? I do think it's kind of boring. I'm not gonna lie to you. I don't necessarily though have that big of a problem with the book itself. I was expecting something more horror. Also based on what other things Paul Tremblay is like known for. It's not really what it is. It's sort of like, I think the way I described it, I read this for Weekend Ween, and you'll be seeing the blog for that this weekend, but I think the way I described it in that blog was basically that this feels like if Garden State was self-aware about the fact that the Natalie Portman character is a manic pixie dream girl, they're trying to find a vampire. Like that's kind of the vibe, and that wasn't what I was expecting. I will say I loved the ending, so that saved it from being a 2 to making it more of a 2.5, because I think the ending was great. I just think that this was a situation where I was really sold a false bill of goods on what this book is like. So if the things I'm describing sound good to you, then, or like if you get in the mood for that and you already have this book, that's when you should read this book. Don't read this book when you're expecting something more in the realm of horror. Be kind of my feeling. So I'm pretty disappointed in this. I don't necessarily think it's terrible. I just think it was not what I was sold or what I was expecting. And even the cool like notes from the person reading the manuscript, I did like that. And she was definitely my favorite character. I liked that, but it wasn't enough to kind of rescue the book for me as a whole, sadly. Because I pre-ordered this sucker. Okay, so then now we're going to talk about my surprises. And let's see how to do this, because I've talked about these in other videos. So, okay, we'll start with Blackwater Rising. I just picked this as the first Attica Locke book I read, and I would just say in general Attica Locke. I did a video called Trying a New Author, and I picked Attica Locke for that. I was surprised the kind of book this was. I'd seen that in, I think, like a Goodreads description, she was described as rural noir, and I think I didn't fully understand what that meant until I read the book, and I found that surprising. That is a really good description of what she does. It is very noir in its kind of pacing and the kinds of characters it has, but it fuses that with a really good awareness, or like a really interesting awareness of like macro social forces. And the book that I would compare Blackwater Rising to is actually The Pelican Brief from John Grisham. Not in this, because John Grisham's is much more of like an action suspensey kind of vibe. This is more slow and considered, but it has a lot of the same kind of set pieces to it in terms of dealing with big oil. You know, this is in Houston, but you know, Pelican Brief is Louisiana. Like it's that same kind of area, and it's in roughly the same kind of time frame and corrupt politicians, etc. But this is like grittier than Grisham. But I guess I just wasn't, what I ended up getting from Attica Locke, I feel like was a little bit surprising to me in a really good way. And I think this book in particular does remind me of Grisham in a way that surprised me. But it's Grisham, but then with like an awareness of the like class and race components that I think Grisham just is not interested in exploring, or probably doesn't even have the awareness necessarily at the time he was writing to explore. So super good. Not quite my kind of book, which is why I didn't rate it higher, but a very interesting project. And Attica Locke is a very good, very interesting writer who I think more people should read. If you like, I think in the end of that video, I said if you like ton of French, you should be reading Attica Locke, I think. And then Dragonhaven, I put as a surprise, and you know what? So part of what I was conflicted about was I was like, I have footage of this, reviewing this and another book that didn't make a vlog. I thought I was going to be doing one vlog and I ended up not doing that. So I have footage of me talking about this book like when I first read it. So maybe I'll go ahead and insert that, and that can kind of be my review, because I think that's kind of fun. The reason I'm putting this as a surprise is that everybody says that they don't like this series, and I think I'm finding that I'm surprised that it's as interesting as it is. I'm also surprised that there's so much like casual or unchecked misogyny in the way that people talk about this book. But let's experiment. Let's put in the review here and see how that goes. Okay. So I finished, sorry, just realized I should not talk too loudly because people are going to bed. I finished Dragonhaven last night, and I think I have an unpopular opinion because I ended up quite liking it. It is pretty slow getting started, and I do think having these two books be split up creates weird pacing for both. But I actually really enjoy just having it be, how to say this? I feel like the Rainwild so far is one of the most readable series from Robin Hobb. Like, I feel like because there's honestly, I don't think as much kind of like subtext happening, and I feel like there's not as much of a premium on the beauty of the language, I feel like is reading faster, and it's just a little more digestible. And this is certainly very, very character focused, like extremely. So if you're not into the characters, I could see that being a problem, because plot-wise, not a ton happens in this. And I mean, I can't really get into too much because it's a sequel in this mini, like in the micro series, but then overall in the realm of the Elderlings, this is like the 10th book? 11th book? 11th book, I guess. So, you can only say so much, but basically what I liked about this is I found the dynamic, particularly with Thymara, and like the pressure she is feeling from others to take a mate, basically. I thought all of that was really interesting, and how that ended up playing out with Jerd, I thought was really moving. So I liked that bit. I looked up some Goodreads reviews to see what people's problem with this book is, and I'm gonna be honest, I do feel like there's a lot of them that are fairly misogynistic, or even if they're not intentionally misogynistic, are sort of like, ugh, I don't like this one because there's romance. And maybe it's totally fine if like you just don't like that, but the tone of several of them to me felt quite like, dude, romance is not nothing happening. Like, it is a type, like a very valid type of character development to engage in. And I do feel like this series so far, it does have a lot of that in it, more so I feel like than the other series. But I wonder if it just feels that way because, relatively speaking, there's not as much other plot happening. So I guess like if you just hated the kind of dynamic, let's say between like Molly and Fitz in an earlier series, or some of the stuff that Theo was dealing with like that kind of love triangle, if you hated those parts of earlier series, I don't think you'll like this series as much, because there's just a lot of emphasis on that, and I think it's interesting. I really like learning more about the dragons, and this is the first time where I'm like, am I just gonna, when I get home and I have City of Dragon, am I just gonna go ahead and read that? Because I really want to find out what they're gonna do once they get at the end of the book. Like, I really want to find out what happens next. So I'm actually surprisingly gonna give this 4 stars and feel weird and like a loner for liking this as much as I did. Maybe the other 2 books are really gonna make it go downhill for me. I don't know. Okay, and then the last surprise I was gonna put was Witches, Midwives, and Nurses, A History of Women Healers by Barbara Ehrenreich and Deidre English. This was written in the 70s and is sort of apparently a classic of second wave feminist literature. I picked this up because I was looking for witchy books at my local independent bookstore, and they had this one in the mix, and I thought it was really interesting looking, and I thought that this ended up being a very serendipitous read, along with Witches, Witch Hunting, and Women by Sylvia Frederici, which I read at the beginning of the month. I think these two together are a great pairing because this is really interesting and thought-provoking about the history of both witches as healers in the Middle Ages, but then also kind of extending that into how women as healers became kind of marginalized and pushed to the side. And it ends up having a very interesting kind of history of that in the context of the development of American medicine and sort of the professionalization of medicine and how that has ended up sidetracking traditional ways of, midwifery or healing or whatever. I will say the glaring omission of this, and this was written in the 70s by, I believe, 2 white women, so I'm not necessarily surprised by this, and they actually say in their second introduction, like, this is a snapshot at a very specific period of time of the feminist discourse, so I don't even know if they would disagree with this critique. But the glaring omission of this is that if you're going to be talking about the development of American gynecological practices or obstetrics, it is known now that basically a ton of what we now know about OBGYN medicine came at the expense of Black enslaved women who were literally, I would say, tortured to derive the knowledge that we now base a lot of medical practice on. And that is nowhere acknowledged in here. And I think that is a huge omission and a problem with the book. So if they were going to include that area or that kind of history, that should have been a part of this. But I do think that this is a very interesting kind of like layering onto that book that I read earlier in the month. I think this is a very apt book to be reading in the wake of the overturn of Roe v. Wade this year here in the US. And also just, I think, overall contextualizing the experience of women's pain, women's suffering, and women's need for medicine and like how problematic that often has been throughout time and history. So this was not on my radar at all, but I ended up really enjoying this and thinking it was a very edifying read. And would it be filming if I didn't have at least one of my cats trying to move the tripod? Today it is Marble. Okay, so let's wrap up by talking about my hits. So I'm gonna try the same thing. Hopefully this is something that will work. I'm going to try the same thing that I did with Dragonhaven with my first hit, which was an Afro-Indigenous History of the United States by Kyle Mays. I read that when I was road tripping in DC, and I will just insert my real-time thoughts here. The audiobook that I finished was an Afro-Indigenous History, I think is the title, by Kyle Mays. This was a super thought-provoking book. Basically, it is exploring, yes, the history between African peoples and indigenous peoples in the United States. It is talking about that, but it's also conceptualizing essentially like grounds for solidarity between those two groups, talking about intersectional identities. So the author himself is both Black and Indigenous. So talking about that tension and some of the fraught areas of that whole dynamic. So that was really interesting. And then also just a few of the ways that he was sort of recontextualizing history. I feel like what he was talking about with Jefferson and the sort of Jeffersonian ideal of democracy or a republic, and how that was very much contingent upon homogeneity of a population for that to work, and some of his ideas about enslaved peoples being sent back to Africa. I thought that was all really interesting and very apropos when I was driving through Virginia. I also really liked some of the stuff that he was saying about conceptualizing African descendants of slaves, ADOS, conceptualizing them as indigenous people whose origin culture has been stripped away, and how that can be a helpful framework for understanding the Black American experience. I thought that was really interesting. He talked a little bit about the overlap between red power and Black power during the civil rights era. I don't know, I just thought he had some interesting critiques of that movement in terms of like misogyny, and also how he had a really interesting section about reparations and how they're not always taking into account, or like rarely are they taking into account, that what some Black activists are asking for ignores the fact, like the original fact, that the land that they're asking for was taken from indigenous people, and how any plan for reparation has to accommodate both groups. So it was very interesting. He was it makes me want to go, like, I feel like a book I need to read soon is The Indigenous History of the United States. I think that's what that book is called. Because I could tell he was critiquing a lot of arguments that I just haven't encountered yet. So he was, for instance, talking about how a lot of scholars conceptualize the Black American experience as one where what is being exploited is labor. So there is an incentive to force or want Black Americans to reproduce in the pre-Civil War era versus the indigenous peoples, what is wanting to be exploited is their land. So in that case, the colonizer narrative is to erase those people so that they can take the land. So it seems like that might be sort of like a normal kind of line of argumentation in this area, and he was sort of critiquing some of that. Yeah, all in all, this was a really thoughtful read. It is pretty academic, but you can tell that he is purposefully kind of like using like less formal language in places. Like, it's clear he's wanting to reach a widespread audience. So if that is something that's interesting to you, I would definitely recommend it. Audiobook was fine, not like remarkable, but a good way to have it presented. And yeah, just a lot of really thoughtful like nuggets, things that I will chew on. And I think as I continue to learn more about sort of like Native American studies, I think I will understand more and more kind of some of the stuff he was getting at. Then we can talk about the 3 hits that I have in physical form here. So I did already talk about the parable of the sower in my Black Aweenathon vlog. So if you want to see my full thoughts, you can go there. But basically, turns out Octavia Butler is as great as everyone says she is in terms of writing. So much to think about in this book in terms of, I think particularly the themes around religion were really interesting to me. And I'm definitely very intrigued to keep going. This is a duology, and I have the second book ordered and on its way to me now. So I will definitely finish the duology. And I'm also looking forward to just reading more from Octavia Butler because she is a really interesting author. This felt like a very multi-layered reading experience, which I appreciated. I think that this could be a good book club pick, by the way. And then I'm gonna say These Fleeting Shadows by Kate Alice Marshall was a hit. So I was expecting more of a thriller, and this actually I would say is more horror. So instead of mystery thriller, I would call this horror mystery, because there's definitely a mystery at the heart of what our main character is trying to figure out, but there are in fact ghouly ghosties, and that's not really at question at any point. Like, you kind of know that there's a paranormal element. So our main character is going home, or going to her ancestral home with her mother, because her grandfather has died. They're going for the funeral, and surprise, at the end of the funeral you find out that he has left everything to her. So this is kind of, my friend Leanna told me that she thought that this reminded her a little bit of the setup for Inheritance games, and I think she's right there. It does kind of have some of those elements, except in this case the main character is getting to know her cousins. So those are sort of the family members. She's related to the people, as opposed to in Inheritance games, she is not related to the people, and therefore can have a love triangle with 2 of the brothers. But that is not what's going on here. She does have a love interest who is the daughter of the groundskeeper, and she is the witch of Harrow, the Harrow Witch, which is the name of the house. And yeah, I just thought that this was really entertaining, a very good version of horror. I think that this had interesting things to say about maybe not allegorizing, but making metaphor of what parents do to their daughters, or are willing to do to their daughters to maintain different orders. I don't want to get into the whole thing because I don't want to spoil anything, but I think that that's just an interesting thematic thread here. And also this idea of integration of self, I guess. Hopefully that makes some kind of sense. But anyway, I like the themes. Thought this was entertaining, well executed, dragged a little bit in the middle-ish to me, but I thought the ending was really, really strong, and I really liked where she went with the ending. I thought it pulled off the horror element in a way that I think can be difficult sometimes when you get the reveal. Sometimes in horror-based media, it feels a little anticlimactic of like, really? That was what we were scared of the whole time? Did not feel that for this book. And then my hit of the month was The Haunting of Maddie Clare by Simone St. James. I have seen people talking about how great this is for years, so I guess I almost put this as a surprise, because I guess I'm not surprised that I loved it so much because it is a book that feels very catered to me. I am surprised that people love this as much as they apparently have in the past. I'm surprised that this, I guess, was a hit, because I don't know that this is a book that I would recommend that widely, because I don't know how many people would actually end up liking it as much as I did, but this is my kind of book. So it is also, I would describe it as a horror mystery. These feel like similar books to me in terms of their project, which is definitely horror, unquestionably has a paranormal element sort of from the jump. There's not really in question, but there is also a mystery that needs to be solved in connection with the horror element. That is definitely what's happening here. So it has a mystery plot, it has speculative elements with the horror, and then it has a very strong romantic component because our main character is having a love-hate whatever with the dude that she's ghost hunting with, or one of the dudes she's ghost hunting with. So the setup is basically, I should mention, actually for both of these, a lot of content warnings. Maybe do some research if you have sensitivity around, you know, like SA and violence against women, things like that. FYI. Setup is that Maddie Claire, the titular Maddie Claire, was a 19-year-old servant girl who ended up committing suicide and is now haunting this property. And she is just full of rage and vengeance, and the owners can't understand why. They loved her. It's clear that the owner of the property really loved this girl and is really sad. Like, the whole thing is, I don't know, I thought that was a really nice element, that it's not like she was some uncaring employer who just doesn't care about Maddie at all. Like, it's clear she was a loved person. And so, like, they're dealing with the sadness from her death, and then they're also dealing with what she has now become, which is like this rage monster. So rich ghost hunter man called in, has a temporary assistant because he needs like a sensitive woman, because Maddie will only talk to women, and things ensue from there. They're trying to understand why Maddie is doing what she's doing, and et cetera, et cetera. So this is my kind of book. I really, really like the writing. I felt like it's the right length. It doesn't go too long, which I think could have been a temptation, and some people fall prey to that. It's not too long. Like, it jumps right into the action and it just is moving along. I liked the haunting elements. I liked how that resolved. I don't know that this is, like, if I'm trying to be objective, there are problems with, like, for instance, the romance in this, but I didn't care. I liked the romance, and it was my kind of trope candy for a romance. And I don't know, it was sort of like a Beauty and the Beast, I think, kind of type of romance a little bit. And yeah, anyway, I don't think this is a perfect book. I'm kind of surprised people like it as much as they do. I really loved it. It's my kind of thing. So 4.5 stars from me. And with that, I think that wraps up the month of October. Let me know what you thought about my experiment of inserting unused vlog footage as my review. I don't know how this is gonna work out in editing. Good luck editing, Mara. I hope I didn't mess you up too much, but it's an experiment. Let me know how you think that went. Let me know what you thought about any of the books I talked about. And yeah, I think that will do it for me. So if you enjoyed this video, please like, subscribe, follow me on the social medias if you are so inclined. I have all that information listed in the description box below, and I think that will do it. I hope you're having an absolutely lovely day today, and I will just talk to you soon. Bye!